This is my latest book. It's called Half Yard Bags and Purses and is full of 12 beautiful bags for you to sew and 12 matching purses. Now you can mix and match those together or you can make them just as they are in the book. You've got simple step-by-step instructions, all very easily laid out for you to understand, with no jargon and no patterns to download or enlarge either. So all of the measurements are given inside the book. What you're also going to find in the book are 8 QR coded videos, which means that if you download a QR scanner onto your smartphone or your tablet, make sure it's a free one. You'll be able to hover over the barcode, which I'll find in just a second, and that'll take you through to hints and tips on things like fitting zips. There's one, look. On making a letterbox zip, that's what I call it. On bias binding, and there's even a video on there which will take you through step by step on how to make the accordion purse. And the reason I did this with the accordion purse is because I thought when I was reading it through, maybe that's going to be a little bit complicated for anybody that's brand new to sewing, and I want you to have a go. So again, you've got a complete video on how to actually make up the purse. But there's lots of different styles of bags. There's bags that are hand sewn. These are made out of a really heavy duty felt. There's the backpack. And again, don't look at my choice of fabrics, look at the style of the bag. You can make that out of denim. You could make it out of a pretty floral fabric. There are evening bags, and again, the matching purses, which you could use as clutch bags as well. But I'm going to give you a tutorial, because I always like to give you something. And in this video, it's going to be the little purse with the rosette on the front here. So the handbag is this one. And it's a lovely technique. It's just using hexagons and strips of fabric, but it creates this rosebud kind of effect, which I've just used diagonally across the tote bag. And then on the matching purse, it's just got one rosette here with a couple of leaves. You will have the patterns of those inside the book that have appliqued onto the side, and it just zips open. You could, if you wanted to, put a longer handle on this. I've put a little D-ring and a piece of ribbon, so I could clip a handle on here, but on the one that I'm going to make for you, I'm just going to put a loop of ribbon, so that's going to make it into a wristlet. So enough talk, let's get sewing. So let's start by making up the little rosettes. I've cut out 2 hexagons just from scrap fabric. You're not going to see this fabric, so it doesn't really matter what it is. So anything that you got left over of any colour really. You're going to need 2 of the hexagons for each one of the rosettes. So we'll put one side for just a second. I'll need a square of fabric to go in the centre, and again, this doesn't have to be a perfect size whatever of fabric, it just needs to be something to cover up the middle bit. And I'm holding that in place with a little bit of glue from a glue stick, and I'll sew that in just a second. I've already cut my fabric into strips. So they're 2.5 inch strips, which is perfect if you have a jelly roll or some fabric strips on a fabric roll. Then cut in half again lengthways, then fold in half, so I've got strips that measure just over 1/2 inch in width. And these are going to be sewn randomly at jaunty angles all the way around the centrepiece, and we'll build that up so that the whole of the hexagon is covered. Now the idea is that you can either start with a lighter colour on the inside and work through to a darker colour, or you can start with a darker colour on the inside and work through to lighter, and that really gives your bloom a little bit of life and a little bit of dimension. But let's take this centrepiece first of all, and we're just going to sew this in place really roughly. I think that's the beauty of making up these rosettes. They don't have to be absolutely perfect. No one's going to see the edges, nobody's going to see your stitches. And if you wanted to, you could even hand sew these. Another different look would be to cut out 1/2 inch strips of felt, in which case you wouldn't actually need to fold them over, because of course felt doesn't fray. So that's my centrepiece. If you wanted to glue the strips as you go, then that's absolutely fine. And although in the book I do give you the measurements for the strips, if you've got long strips like this, it might be more economical to just place them, sew them, and then cut them. So making sure that the edges overlap. And again, no particular angle. These aren't, you don't need a set square to fit them. I'm just going to sew and then cut, and then using the same colour I'm just going to overlap slightly here and sew the next piece. And we'll go all the way around the central piece of fabric using the same colour. And this would be really striking, you know, if you wanted to make them really realistic, then go for reds and pinks and start with that very pale colour in the centre and work through to a dark one on the outside. If you wanted a very modern look, then how about doing these in monochrome, in blacks and whites, or black, white and grey would look amazing. And of course, you can do these in any shape. I do have another video on YouTube with a similar kind of technique using squares and making a tote bag out of them, so it doesn't have to be a hexagon. Or round would look pretty as well. So let's move on to the next shade. And this time I'm going to overlap kind of where the points of my square is here. I'm going to overlap in this direction. And again, just keep building it up as you're working your way to the edge. So you can make huge ones. This is just the right kind of size to go on the front of my purse. But if I wanted to make one of these to go onto a cushion cover, I could have my hexagon, oh gosh, 12 inches across. I could make a massive big one. In fact, you could actually make a cushion cover out of the hexagon. Wouldn't that be amazing? Oh, I'm putting thoughts into my own head now. I could do that, couldn't I? Let's get an angle here. That could be a whole new book. Now, when I've put on the final strip, I've sewn all the way around the outside of the hexagon and then trim back all of the strips until they're the size of the hexagon shape. Then you're going to take another piece of the hexagon scrap and put that right sides together and sew all the way around the outside. Then in the centre, make a hole. It doesn't matter how big that is as long as it doesn't go right up to the edge. So it could be a split or a cross or just a hole in the middle. And then you're going to turn the whole thing the right side out. And then you're left with this. So you've got that lovely little rosette. Now with this one, what I've also done is to put a little bit of toy filler into the back of it, so it makes it more three-dimensional, it raises it up. And then this is going to go onto the front of my little purse. What have you got down there? No, I don't think so. No, we don't. Good girl. Puppy break. Now on the purse in your instructions, there are templates for the leaves as well. So with this little purse here, I've actually used a heat and bond fusible adhesive onto the back of them, put them in place one at a time, so the base one down first, and then satin stitched around the edge, and I've done a triple stitch or a back stitch right down the centre of the leaf to make a vein. Those go on first and then place the rosette over the top. But on the one that I'm making now, it's going to be a little bit different because I'm just going to use that rosette on its own like so in the middle. Wherever you put it, don't put it too close to the top, too close to the side or too close to the bottom because that's going to interfere with your seam allowance. So I'm just going to place mine a little bit off centre and I'm just going to have it like that. So to hold it in place, if you need to, you can put a little bit of glue from a glue stick just around the edge there and place that down. And then I'm going to hand sew this purely because it's going to be a little bit bulky to get underneath the sewing machine and I don't actually want to see the stitches. So I'm going to bring the needle in from the back, and this is on the side of the fabric that has the fusible fleece or the wadding behind it. And I'm going to do a really small little slip stitch, so into the main fabric and then out again. And we'll do this all the way across. Right, I just knocked my my thread off at the back there, and that's now done. If you wanted to add things like a stem, in maybe even a stem stitch, do a little bit of embroidery, or leaves or hand sewn petals would look very nice with free motion embroidery. Now's the time to do anything like that. If you wanted to add any extra little bits of applique, leaves and vines and things like that, now's the time to do it. Let's put the zip in. I sound a bit like a broken record, but I like to use zips that are too long. And the reason for that is when I put my zip in, if my zip's long, I can move the slider right out of the way and it gives me a nice clear line to sew the zip without having to worry about manoeuvring around the slider. And with nylon zips like this, you can cut them down to size. You can just cut straight through them. It's not going to damage you, your zip or your scissors. So I'm going to line that up to the top of the piece that I've just sewn. I'm not going to use the zipper foot on my sewing machine this time. I'm just going to move the needle over right to the left hand side, like that. Line up the two edges of the zip and then we'll sew. So that's how we're looking. And then the lining section, so the piece that's the same size as this one, will go on the opposite side of the zip. So line up the edges, then you may find it easier to sew from the side that you've just sewn so that you can see where the stitch line is, and just sew straight over the top. So there's the zip sandwiched in between the two pieces. Then we'll need to do the same again with the top. So take the padded side, face down. You can see I've actually joined that together because I didn't quite have a piece of wadding that was quite long enough, but that's fine. And I've just used, it's only an ordinary wool wadding or batting, just the same kind of thing that you'd use on a quilt, but I've used a little bit of 505 spray to hold it in place. You can buy single-sided fusible wadding or fleece, so you could use that if you wish. Or if you've already got a fabric that's quite heavy, it might not even need any waddings or interlinings or anything. You know, if you're using something that's the weight of curtain fabric, then it might be thick enough without doing that. Feel the drape of your fabric before you start sewing. So there's the top. We need to put the lining on the opposite side here. So again, making sure that the zip is sandwiched in between the two pieces, and again, finding it easier to sew from the line that I've just stitched. Now, a little tip for you at this point would be to open this out, and if you do have some spray adhesive, just put a little bit in between the lining and the outside, and that's going to help to hold this in place while you construct the rest of the bag. And just the same across the top piece. Put a piece of paper down first so you don't get it all over the table like what I just held. And then I'm just going to top stitch across either side here for two reasons. One, because it looks nice, it gives a professional look to your bag, and the second one, it helps to hold those layers of wadding, batting and fabrics together and stops them trying to fold over and get in the way of your zip. Now this is going to help construct your bag, the construction of your bag a little bit easier, because now I'm going to trim the zip down, and there will be a point where I'll need that zip open where I turn the whole bag the right side out, and this can happen So what I'm going to do is to chop off the ends of the zip and then hand sew the ends together, and that'll just keep them nice and neatly in place while I sew around them. And if I sew within the seam allowance, I don't have to worry about unpicking these stitches. So I'm just sewing over and over and over a few times just to hold those in place. That'll do. Then we'll chop off this end of the zip. I'm going to put a piece of ribbon as a wristlet. The instructions in the book show you how to put just a little loop in there with a D-ring on it. It's just a 1/2 inch D-ring, and I've just tied some ribbon onto this one. But the idea is that you could put a wristlet on with the clip, one of those little swivel snaps, or you could, I don't know, hang keys off it or whatever you like. So let's just cut a length of this. And I'm going to fold that in half, facing inwards, and I'm going to sew that just above the zip. And again, keep that within the seam allowance, so close to the edge. So this is just a tacking or basting stitch, just to hold it in place. Then we're going to start sewing. So the two pieces I have remaining are the padded outer back piece and the unpadded lining piece. So take the padded piece, right sides together with the front of the bag, and we're going to sew straight across the bottom. I'm going to switch my machine off and on again because that will default the setting back to a central straight stitch. Sometimes it's quicker than just trying to move the needle across again. And with your 1/4 inch seam allowance, again, we're going to sew straight across the bottom. Now my machine has a dual feed, which is this funny looking foot with the big thing that goes in the back of it. If you have a walking foot on your machine, you're going to find that really useful, because now we're looking at, it's almost like a quilted effect. I've got the wadding, I've got the layers of fabric. In fact, I've got 2 layers of wadding, and the thicker your fabrics get and the more layers of fabric they have, the more likelihood it is that your fabric will slip. So if you have a walking foot or a dual feed foot, that foot will help to feed the fabric through from the top, as well as the feed dogs will feed it through the machine underneath. So an even feed foot literally evenly feeds the fabric through, so it's not going to slip. So you may find that useful. As we have got lots of layers, also, if you have a presser foot pressure guide on your machine, then you may want to reduce the pressure a little bit, because now we've got thicker layers. If you haven't got any of the above, don't worry. You can still make the bag. Don't go spending lots of money on things that you might not necessarily need just yet. Right, so that's how we're looking now. Now let's put the lining on. Right, and now the lining piece needs to go on top of the lining side. So wadding on that side, lining on that side, lining piece on top of there. And we're going to sew all the way around the outside, apart from a gap in the bottom of 2 or 3 inches, so I can turn the whole thing the right side out. Here we go. So I'm going to sew a few stitches backwards before I go forwards, just to reinforce the seam, and literally sew all the way around the edge. Don't worry about sewing over zips. They've been made to do that if you're using a nylon zip. If by any chance using a metal zip, that's a completely different kettle of fish. Right down the other side. There we go. And across the bottom, leaving the gap. Okay. Let's snip across the corners, and that'll cut down on the amount of bulk, so my points are going to be pointier, and then we'll turn the whole thing the right side out. This may be a squeeze, there's a lot of fabric to go through that hole. It may not look quite right when you turn this out, because now I'm completely inside out. But it's at this point that I would sew the opening closed, and do that by hand. So fold the two edges of that. I'm not going to do it now because it'll take ages. Fold the two edges of the fabric over like that, and then you can just do a slip stitch or an overedge stitch. It doesn't really matter, that's on the inside. When you've sewn the whole together, then we're going to turn the whole thing the right side out again, this time through the zipped opening. It'll be very crumpled up, so we'll give this an iron before you see the actual finished result. Just poking out those corners. And in the top section, push that out. Over there. Right, I'm just going to give that an iron. And then I'll come back and show you how fabulous that looks. So there's my finished little purse. So that's a variation on the purse that you'll see in the book. And the way that it's been put together, if I just open this up and show you the inside, means that you don't see any of the raw edges. So all the way around there, you've got a really nice professional finished seam. So I hope you enjoy making yours. I hope you find all of the bags easy to make. And I hope that you put your own twist on them as well. Enjoy!